Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we are taking a massive historical dive into 2.5 centuries of a nation built on what was, honestly, a totally radical concept at the time: the power of ordinary people. We're gonna get right into the facts, the timelines, and those really profound ideas that literally turned the world upside down. Think about it. American independence wasn't just about cutting ties with a king. It was this bold, earth-shattering idea that completely shifted the course of human history. The whole thing centered on this wild belief that regular people could actually shape their own destiny, instead of just taking orders from an empire thousands of miles across the ocean. But, as history always shows us, taking a massive idea like that and making it real, yeah, that's not exactly easy.
Part 1. The Spark of Rebellion.
So let's set the historical scene. Mid-1700s, you've got 13 thriving British colonies stretching right up and down the eastern coast of North America. And these places were booming. They were diverse, prosperous communities built by farmers, merchants, and immigrants from all over Europe. Actually, colonial Americans had one of the highest standards of living in the world back then. And for a long time, the setup with Britain worked out great. The colonies got military protection, and in return, they pumped a ton of wealth back into the empire. But under all that surface-level success, tensions were quietly but very steadily starting to boil. Okay, so 1763 is the real turning point here. The French and Indian War wraps up. Britain wins, but that victory came with a completely crushing financial hangover. To dig out of that massive debt, the British government basically looked at the colonies and said, "Time to pay up." And it was relentless. Just rapid-fire economic pressure, the Sugar Act, then the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, the Tea Act, just a constant, heavy barrage of new financial burdens squeezing the colonists. And that brings us to a phrase you've definitely heard: no taxation without representation. It perfectly nailed exactly why the colonists were so furious. You know, it wasn't even just about losing the money. It was the total outrage of being heavily taxed while having absolutely zero voice in the British Parliament. That one simple, catchy phrase, it would literally go on to ignite a global revolution. Part 2. Point of no return. Now, Boston quickly becomes the absolute epicenter of all this resistance. You've got groups like the Sons of Liberty stirring things up. Then, March 1770, the Boston Massacre happens. British soldiers open fire, 5 civilians are killed, and the colonial anger just explodes. That exact fury directly provokes the Boston Tea Party a few years later, where colonists chucked an astonishing 340 chests of British tea straight into the harbor. Naturally, London responds with sweeping, harsh punishments, but it completely backfired. Instead of making the colonies submit, those crackdowns just forced them to unite against the crown. By April 1775, things just boil over. British troops march on Lexington and Concord to seize weapons, and local militias are waiting for them. Now, nobody actually knows who fired first, but history remembers it as the shot heard around the world. In an instant, you've got teenagers and farmers with hunting muskets suddenly at war with highly trained professionals from one of the most powerful militaries on Earth. The American Revolutionary War was officially on. Part 3. The fight for freedom. So, blood has been spilled. Going back to how things were was completely off the table. On July 4th, 1776, the Continental Congress formally adopts the Declaration of Independence. Mostly penned by Thomas Jefferson, it announced to the world that these colonies were now free, independent states, and guys, this was arguably one of history's boldest political statements ever. It wasn't merely a declaration of war. It was a profound, deeply philosophical statement about fundamental human rights. But look, saying you're independent and actually winning a war to prove it, totally different ballgame. It is honestly a historical miracle the Continental Army held together. It was a classic David and Goliath setup. The Americans were facing the world's strongest navy and a highly equipped army, while they were constantly dealing with desperate shortages of food, money, and weapons. The physical misery was just immense. During that brutal winter camp at Valley Forge, soldiers were literally leaving bloody footprints in the snow because they didn't even have proper boots. Surviving that against such insane odds is a massive credit to the troops' sheer courage and the strict discipline kept by General George Washington. The real clincher finally comes in 1781. The Continental Army honestly couldn't have pulled it off alone, and French support was the ultimate game changer. We're talking French soldiers, ships, and serious financial aid that totally flipped the balance of power. American and French forces managed to trap British General Cornwallis at Yorktown, Virginia. With the British Navy unable to bail him out, and after weeks of being besieged, he was forced to surrender. 2 years later, the Treaty of Paris officially recognized the United States as a brand new nation.
Part 4. Building a new republic.
Right, so you've won the war. Now what? The new nation had to tackle some incredibly massive questions. Like, how should this government actually work? How do we keep power in check? The answer was this grand American experiment. They hammered out an intricate system of checks and balances with the newly drafted Constitution. They elected George Washington, their unifying military hero, as the very first president. And crucially, they locked in foundational liberties with the Bill of Rights, guaranteeing things we talk about every single day: freedom of speech, religion, and the press.
Part 5. The Untold Side of Independence.
Now, to really grasp this history, we have to look impartially at the stark reality of the era. The truth is that high-minded promise of liberty wasn't extended to everyone right out of the gate. Looking at the historical facts, we see that many Native American nations lost vast amounts of land and influence. Thousands of enslaved Africans remained in bondage. Women contributed hugely to the war effort, yet they were completely denied political rights. And loyalists, the folks who backed the British crown, often lost their homes and property. So for all these groups, achieving true equality was going to be a long, very unfinished historical journey.
Part 6. America at 250.
Fast forward through the last 2.5 centuries, and this nation has been through it all. Massive trials, incredible triumphs. We're talking about surviving a brutal civil war, weathering severe economic crashes, pushing through major social movements, and even driving global scientific breakthroughs. I mean, everything from putting a man on the moon to sparking the digital revolution. But through all of that change, America's vast global influence still fundamentally rests on those core ideas set down way back in 1776.
Because, history isn't just a bunch of dusty dates in the past. It's literally the foundation for the future. And those events from 250 years ago force us to continually ask ourselves this one critical question today: what is freedom? And as the nation keeps evolving at lightning speed in the 21st century, the next question is just as relevant now as it was then. Who should govern? It's the central debate of this ongoing democratic experiment started by those very first colonists. And finally, how can liberty and equality truly coexist? The idea that governments derive their power from the people themselves? Well, it continues to inspire hope, fierce debate, and profound change all over the world. Thank you so much for joining this explainer. Keep questioning and keep exploring the history that shapes our world.